After we got married, my husband's parents insisted, "We'll be staying with you for a few months. It's tradition." The champagne bubbles had barely settled in our glasses when the announcement came. We were seated at the post-wedding brunch, surrounded by wilting flower arrangements and half-eaten cake, when Daniel's mother Margaret leaned across the table with that smile of hers, the one that never quite reached her eyes. "Now that you two are officially family," she said, her voice carrying that distinctive Charleston lilt that somehow made everything sound both sweet and non-negotiable, "Gerald and I will be moving in with you next week. Just for a few months, of course. It's tradition." I nearly choked on my mimosa. Tradition? Daniel had never mentioned this particular family custom during our 18 months together. I glanced at my new husband, expecting to see the same surprise on his face. Instead, he nodded as if this had been the plan all along. "Right, Mom. We've got the guest room all set up." The guest room that I had been planning to turn into a home office. The guest room in our 1,200 square foot starter home that suddenly seemed far too small. "Isn't that lovely, Olivia?" Margaret's perfectly manicured hand reached across to pat mine. Her diamond tennis bracelet caught the light, momentarily blinding me. "It's how we welcome new brides into the family. Helps with the transition." Transition to what, exactly? I wondered, but I swallowed my questions along with the last of my drink and forced a smile. How thoughtful. Daniel squeezed my knee under the table, our signal that he'd explain later. And he did, sort of, as we drove home from the brunch in comfortable silence, my wedding dress carefully packed away in the trunk. "It's just how things are done," he said, keeping his eyes on the road. "My sister went through it when she married Todd. It's not a big deal, just a few months while they help us get settled." "Settled? We've been living together for a year," I pointed out. "We're pretty settled." "Yeah, but this is different. It's marriage. Trust me, it'll be fine. My parents are easy." Easy wasn't the word I would have chosen for Margaret and Gerald Porter. Formidable, perhaps. Particular. Old money that didn't need to flaunt itself because everyone already knew. But I bit my tongue. This was important to Daniel, and marriage meant compromise. I could do a few months. 7 days later, they arrived with more luggage than seemed necessary for a temporary stay. Gerald, at least, had the decency to look slightly embarrassed as he carried in the third suitcase. Margaret walked through our front door like she was conducting an inspection, her pearl necklace gleaming against her cashmere sweater. "Oh," she said, pausing in our living room. Just, "oh," but somehow that single syllable contained paragraphs of disapproval. Her eyes lingered on the second-hand couch we'd found at an estate sale, the mismatched throw pillows, the IKEA coffee table. "We're still piecing things together," I explained, suddenly defensive about our eclectic decor that had seemed charming until about 30 seconds ago. "Of course you are, dear." Her smile tightened. Everyone starts somewhere. That night, after helping Margaret and Gerald settle into the guest room, our second bedroom that now housed their queen-sized air mattress because they couldn't possibly sleep on a full, Daniel and I retreated to our bedroom. "See? Not so bad," he whispered as we changed for bed. I wanted to agree with him. Wanted to be the cool, accommodating wife who got along effortlessly with her in-laws. But something about Margaret's presence in our home made me feel like I was walking on eggshells in my own kitchen. "The master bedroom is cozy," Margaret had commented while peering in from a hallway. Cozy being Southern code for cramped and inadequate. "Hardly room to swing a cat," she'd added with a little laugh, as if to soften the critique. By day 3, Margaret had rearranged our kitchen cabinets because it's more efficient this way, dear. By day 5, she'd replaced our shower curtain with one she'd brought from Charleston because ours wasn't quite mildew-resistant enough for this humid climate. By the end of the first week, I found myself asking permission to use my own washing machine because Margaret had established an elaborate laundry schedule. "I just don't want to interrupt your mother system," I told Daniel as we got ready for bed on day 8. "It's like living in a very polite boot camp." He laughed and pulled me close. "She's just trying to help. My mom shows love through organization." "Is that what this is?" I nestled against his chest, trying to find comfort in his familiar scent. "Because it feels like she's marking territory." Come on, Liv. It's not that serious. But it felt serious when I came home from work to find my cookbooks relegated to a box in the garage because they were cluttering up the counter space. It felt serious when Margaret casually mentioned that Daniel had always been partial to women who dressed more classically, less experimental, while eyeing my vintage jumpsuit. It felt serious when I realized I was changing my own habits in my own home to avoid her subtle criticisms. By the end of the first week, I wasn't sure who was hosting whom. Our refrigerator was now stocked with foods I never bought: pickled okra, cheese straws, and sweet tea so sugary it made my teeth ache. The throw blanket my grandmother had knitted disappeared from the living room, replaced by a monogrammed Afghan in the Porter's family colors. And Daniel, my wonderful, conflict-averse husband, seemed oblivious to it all. Or worse, comfortable with it. As if his life had simply reverted to its factory settings, son of Margaret and Gerald Porter, Charleston royalty, temporarily living in this starter home with that girl he'd married. That girl. Me. The outsider who was beginning to wonder if she'd made a terrible mistake. By the third week of the Porter's stay, Margaret's takeover had moved beyond subtle rearrangements to full-scale domestic colonization. It started one Sunday morning when I padded into the kitchen to make coffee, only to find her already there, stirring something on the stove. "Good morning, Olivia," she said, not turning around. "I hope you don't mind, but I've started breakfast." Daniel always did love my cheese grits on Sundays. Before I could respond, she added, "The coffee you buy is a bit astringent for our taste." I took the liberty of picking up our preferred brand. It's in the blue canister now. I've relabeled everything. So much more organized, don't you think? I stared at my kitchen, transformed overnight. Every container now bore a neat label in Margaret's elegant script. The mugs, my collection from various travels, had been replaced in the front row by matching porcelain cups with tiny blue flowers. "Thanks," I managed, reaching for one of my own mugs now hidden in the back of the cabinet. "But I actually like my coffee." Margaret's shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly. "Of course you do, dear. But Daniel grew up on Charleston blend. His system is accustomed to it." That was the first time I noticed the pattern. Margaret never directly criticized my choices. She simply reframed them as being unsuitable for Daniel, her Daniel, the son she knew better than anyone. The laundry was next. I came home from work one Tuesday to find all of Daniel's dress shirts ironed and hanging in color-coordinated precision in our closet. "Margaret, you didn't have to do Daniel's shirts," I said, trying to sound appreciative rather than annoyed. "Oh, it was no trouble," she replied, folding one of his undershirts with military precision. "Daniel needs his collar pressed just so for work. There's a specific technique his father taught me years ago. Here, let me show you how he prefers them." For the next 20 minutes, I stood there like a schoolgirl receiving instructions on how to fold my husband's underwear. Apparently, I'd been doing it wrong for the entire year we'd lived together, and Daniel had been too polite to mention it. The bills were the last straw. I'd always handled our finances. My background in accounting made me the natural choice. But one evening, I opened my laptop to pay our monthly utilities and found the accounts already settled. "Did you pay the electric bill?" I asked Daniel that night. He looked up from his book, brow furrowed. "Mom mentioned something about helping with that. She said she noticed it was due and didn't want us to forget." "We've never forgotten a bill, Daniel. We have auto reminders." He shrugged. "She was just trying to help by accessing our private accounts." "I may have given her the passwords when she asked," he admitted. "She said it would be easier to manage things if she could just take care of all that for us while they're here. Less for you to worry about." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning Margaret kept adjusting to the proper setting for optimal sleep. This wasn't just about kitchen cabinets anymore. This was about control, financial, domestic, and most disturbingly marital. "Daniel, don't you think it's strange that your mother is taking over every aspect of our lives? The food, the laundry, now our bills." He sighed, setting his book down. "She's not taking over, Liv. She's helping. That's what family does. My family helps by bringing dinner when we're sick or offering to mow the lawn, not by moving in and rearranging our entire existence. "You're exaggerating," he said, his voice taking on that dismissive tone I was starting to hate. "It's just her way." Her way. I was beginning to understand exactly what her way entailed. It was death by 1,000 cuts, small adjustments that individually seemed helpful, but collectively erased my presence from my own home. The next day, I took a sick day from work, needing space to think. I was sitting on our back porch, the one place Margaret hadn't yet improved, when I heard her on the phone in the kitchen, voice lowered but still audible through the cracked window. "No, it's not ideal," she was saying. "She's very independent. Not at all what we expected for Daniel." A pause. "Yes, exactly. Nothing like Becky. Remember how Becky would always help with the family functions? So natural with the social aspects." Another pause. "Well, we'll see. She's not exactly what we envisioned, but we'll handle it. Becky was always a better fit anyway." Becky. The name hit me like a slap. Daniel's ex-fiancée from Charleston, the proper Southern belle from the right family whose engagement to Daniel had ended mysteriously 6 months before I met him. He rarely spoke of her, except to say it hadn't worked out. I sat frozen, processing what I'd just heard. Not only was I being measured against an invisible standard, but the standard had a name. And apparently, I was falling catastrophically short. That evening, as Margaret served her special recipe pot roast, the one Daniel had apparently been missing terribly, I watched my husband devour it with enthusiasm while complimenting his mother's cooking. The same husband who'd claimed to be a vegetarian when we first met. "Mom always made this for Sunday dinners," he explained between bites. "It's kind of a tradition I knew nothing about." Because apparently, my husband had an entire history of preferences, traditions, and relationships that he'd simply set aside when he met me. Or had he? I picked at my food, wondering if this was the plan all along, to slowly reintroduce Daniel to the comforts of his former life until he realized what he'd given up by marrying outside the fold. After dinner, I excused myself while Margaret and Gerald settled in with Daniel to watch a documentary about Charleston architecture, another tradition I'd never been informed of. In our bedroom, I opened my laptop and typed a name I'd promised myself I'd never Google: Rebecca Harrington, Daniel's almost wife. The woman who, according to Margaret's phone conversation, was always a better fit. The search results loaded, and I found myself staring at the Facebook profile of a stunning blonde with pearl earrings and a smile that belonged on a Southern Living cover. In her photos, she stood on the porch of a grand Charleston home, attended charity galas, and posed with a golden retriever named Duchess. She was everything I wasn't. And as I scrolled through her perfectly curated life, I realized with growing dread that she was exactly what Margaret had in mind for her son. That night, I barely slept. Becky's perfect smile haunted my dreams, morphing between Southern charm and predatory triumph. By morning, I had convinced myself I was overreacting. One overheard phone conversation didn't mean there was a conspiracy to reunite Daniel with his ex. That would be absurd, the plot of a bad Lifetime movie, not my actual life. I decided to confront the issue head-on. "Daniel," I said as we got ready for work, keeping my voice casual, "you never really told me why things ended with Becky." His hands froze midway through tying his tie. "Where did that come from?" "Just curious. Your mother mentioned her yesterday." "Mom mentioned Becky?" His brow furrowed. "That's odd. They don't really talk anymore." I watched his face carefully. There was confusion there, but something else too. Discomfort? Guilt? "So, why did you break up?" I pressed. Daniel sighed, finishing his tie with quick, practiced movements. "It was complicated. Our families had been friends for generations. Everyone expected us to get married, but when it came down to it, we wanted different things." He kissed my forehead. "And then I met you, and nothing else mattered." It was the perfect answer. "So, why did it feel rehearsed? Has she ever tried to contact you? Since Liv, where's this coming from?" Daniel checked his watch. "I'm going to be late. Just answer the question." "No, she hasn't," he said firmly. "Becky's in the past, a relic. She's probably married to some banking executive by now, hosting charity luncheons and summering in the Hamptons. His description was so specific, so contemptuous, that I almost believed him. Almost. "We should invite your parents for dinner tonight," I said, changing tactics. "I'll cook." Daniel looked genuinely alarmed. "You don't have to do that. Mom's already planned a pot roast." "Another pot roast? We just had that." "It's different," he insisted. "This one's her Kentucky bourbon recipe." I bit my tongue. The great Charleston recipe arsenal seemed endless. At work, I couldn't concentrate. Spreadsheets blurred before my eyes as I replayed Margaret's words. Becky was always a better fit. What had she meant by, "we'll handle it"? Who was we? And why did it sound so ominous? That afternoon, I left work early, a headache brewing behind my eyes. I needed aspirin, quiet, and perhaps a stiff drink. In that order. I didn't expect to find a silver Mercedes in our driveway, a car I'd never seen before. Nor did I expect to hear laughter from inside my house, feminine laughter mixing with Margaret's distinctive chuckle. The front door was unlocked. I stepped inside quietly, following the voices to the kitchen. And there she was. Becky looked even more flawless in person, honey blonde hair falling in perfect waves, crisp white blouse tucked into navy slacks, and those damn pearl earrings catching the afternoon light. She sat at my kitchen table, sipping from one of Margaret's blue-flowered cups, looking for all the world like she belonged there. "Olivia." Margaret spotted me first, her surprise quickly masked by a tight smile. "You're home early." Rebecca just stopped by to return some family photos she found while cleaning out her mother's attic. Wasn't that thoughtful? Becky stood, extending a manicured hand. "So nice to finally meet you. I've heard so much about Daniel's new wife." "New." As if I were the replacement model, the upgrade that might still be returned if found defective. "Funny," I replied, not taking her hand. "Daniel rarely mentions you." The kitchen went silent. Margaret's smile froze. Becky's hand slowly lowered. "Well," she said, recovering gracefully, "that's Daniel for you. Always looking forward, never back. And yet here you are in our kitchen. Quite a coincidence." Margaret intervened, her voice honey-sweet, but eyes sharp as flint. "Rebecca was just leaving. She has that charity auction tonight, the one for children's literacy. She's the chairperson this year." Of course she was. "Don't let me interrupt," I said, my headache now a full-blown migraine. I just came home for some aspirin. I retreated to our bedroom, hands shaking as I fumbled with the pill bottle. Through the closed door, I could hear their muffled conversation resuming. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, the comfortable familiarity of people who shared history, inside jokes, and possibly current schemes. When I emerged 20 minutes later, Becky was gone. Margaret was wiping down the already spotless counters, humming to herself. "Such a lovely girl," she commented without looking at me. "Did you know she runs her family's foundation now? Very impressive for someone so young." "Fascinating," I muttered, filling a glass with water. "She always had a good head for business. Rather like Daniel, they think alike." Margaret folded the dishcloth with precise creases. "They dated for nearly 5 years, you know. Everyone thought they'd marry. But they didn't," I pointed out. "Daniel married me." Margaret's smile didn't waver. "Yes, he did. Rather quickly, too." The implication hung in the air between us. That evening, as we ate yet another pot roast, distinguishable from the previous one only by a faint whisper of bourbon, Gerald regaled us with stories of Daniel's childhood, most of which, I noticed, somehow featured Becky. "Remember when you and Becky won that sailing competition?" Gerald chuckled. "Youngest team ever to take the Charleston Cup. And the debutante ball," Margaret added. Becky looked absolutely radiant in her grandmother's pearls. "Everyone said you two were the perfect couple." Daniel, to his credit, looked increasingly uncomfortable. "That was a long time ago," he said, avoiding my eyes. "Not so long," Margaret countered. "And speaking of Becky, she mentioned her family's beach house is empty next month. Wouldn't it be nice to spend a weekend there? For old time's sake." I set down my fork with a clatter. "Daniel won't be available. We're visiting my parents that weekend. It was a lie. We had no such plans, but the look of surprise on Margaret's face was worth it. Later that night, I confronted Daniel. Becky was here today. He froze in the act of removing his watch. What? In our kitchen. Having tea with your mother. Apparently, she just happened to find some old family photos. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. I had no idea. How often does she call here, Daniel? What are you talking about? Don't play dumb. Your mother practically worships her. She compares me to Becky constantly. Becky makes sweet tea from scratch. Becky knows how to cook ribs properly. Becky had manners. He looked genuinely shocked. Mom said those things to you? Not to my face. But I hear them. And now Becky's showing up at our house like she owns the place. What's going on, Daniel? Is there something you're not telling me? He sat heavily on the bed. Nothing's going on. Becky and I are over. Have been for a long time. Then why is she suddenly everywhere? Why is your mother inviting us to her beach house? Daniel sighed, looking defeated. I don't know, but I'll talk to Mom. This isn't right. I wanted to believe him, but as I lay awake that night, listening to his steady breathing beside me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something crucial. The pieces didn't fit. Daniel's apparent surprise seemed genuine, but so did Becky's comfort in our home. Someone was lying, and I was beginning to suspect it might be everyone except me. I made a decision then, in the darkness of our bedroom. I would no longer be passive, waiting for the next boundary to be crossed. I would watch. I would gather information. And most importantly, I would plan. Because one thing was becoming increasingly clear. This wasn't just about a meddling mother-in-law. There was something larger at play, a hidden agenda that had begun long before I entered the picture. And I intended to uncover it before it unraveled everything I'd built with Daniel. The following morning, I called in sick to work again. As soon as Daniel and his father left for their respective offices and Margaret departed for her weekly hair appointment, I began my investigation. I started with Daniel's desk in our small home office. The corner of the living room we'd sectioned off with a bookshelf. His laptop was password protected, but I knew the code. My birthday, followed by the year we met. A small comfort. His emails revealed nothing unusual at first glance. Work correspondence, fantasy football updates, newsletters. I was about to close the browser when I noticed a folder labeled Family Finances that I'd never seen before. Inside were statements for an account I didn't recognize, Porter Family Holdings. Monthly transfers had been going into this account since his parents arrived. Small amounts at first, $500 here, $750 there. But the last transfer, dated just 3 days ago, was for $3,200, nearly half of Daniel's monthly salary. My stomach dropped. I checked our joint account, where Daniel's paychecks were deposited. The balance was significantly lower than it should have been. A quick scan of recent transactions showed a pattern, money going in on payday, then large withdrawals shortly after. I took screenshots, my hands trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. This wasn't just emotional manipulation, it was financial sabotage. Next, I tried to log into our online banking portal to check our savings account. The password didn't work. I tried again, carefully typing each character. Incorrect password. Please try again. I called the bank directly. I'm sorry, Mrs. Porter, but it appears your account access was modified last week, the customer service representative explained. Your husband requested that statements be sent to a different email address and changed the online access credentials. My husband did this? My voice sounded hollow to my own ears. Yes, ma'am. We have the verification call recorded, if you need confirmation. That won't be necessary, I said, thanking her before hanging up. Daniel had changed our banking passwords without telling me.
But why?
Was he aware of what was happening, or was he being manipulated too? I moved on to the guest room, feeling like a thief in my own home. Margaret and Gerald kept it meticulously tidy, but their briefcase sat on the dresser, Gerald's prized leather attaché case that he carried everywhere. It was locked, of course. I found the key in the inside pocket of his suit jacket hanging in our coat closet. Predictable Gerald, always adhering to the same habits. Inside the briefcase were legal documents, neatly organized in manila folders. Mostly property deeds and investment papers, until I came across a folder labeled D and Our Agreement. D for Daniel, R for Rebecca. The document inside was dated 5 years ago, but had never been formally dissolved. It outlined a merger of family assets upon marriage, the Porter shipping business, and the Harrington real estate empire. Properties, stock portfolios, trust funds, all contingent upon Daniel and Rebecca's union. An arrangement worth millions. And at the bottom of the folder was a handwritten note in what I recognized as Gerald's precise script. Contingency plan, discuss with Margaret Rhee. Temporary separation. Harrington patience wearing thin. My hands went cold. This wasn't just about family tradition or Southern expectations. This was business. A merger, a contract, an obligation that Daniel had walked away from when he married me. But had he really walked away? Or was this temporary separation part of some larger strategy? I photographed everything, my mind racing. I needed more evidence, more concrete proof of what they were doing. The final piece came from an unexpected source, our credit card statement. It had arrived that morning, and I tossed it aside to deal with later. Now I opened it with growing dread. Charges at stores I never visited. Restaurants in parts of town I rarely frequented. And most damning of all, a jewelry purchase from an expensive boutique downtown, on a day when I'd been at work. I recognized the store name from a Charleston magazine Margaret had been reading. It was where Becky's family traditionally bought their engagement jewelry. A $4,200 charge for what the receipt itemized as a vintage pearl setting.
Pearl.
Like the ones Becky always wore. I sat amid the paper evidence of my unraveling marriage, connecting dots that formed a picture too awful to contemplate. Daniel's parents hadn't come to bond with their new daughter-in-law. They had come to reclaim their son, his money, his loyalty, and ultimately his life. I had walked into a trap designed long before I'd even met Daniel. A trap now closing around me with frightening efficiency. The front door opened, interrupting my thoughts. I quickly gathered the evidence, shoving it into my laptop bag just as Margaret's voice called out. "Olivia, are you home, dear?" I stepped out of the guest room, my heart pounding, just looking for some Tylenol. I lied, still fighting this headache. Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly, taking in my flushed face. "You look feverish. Perhaps you should lie down." Her gaze flicked to the laptop bag clutched in my hand. "Were you working? You really shouldn't strain your eyes when you're unwell." "Just answering a few emails," I said, forcing a smile. "I think I will rest for a bit." In our bedroom, I locked the door and spread the evidence across our bed, bank statements, screenshots, photographs of the merger agreement. The story they told was clear. I was being systematically erased, financially and emotionally, to make room for the return of Becky.
But why?
If Daniel had truly wanted to marry her, why leave in the first place? Something was missing, a crucial piece that would make sense of it all. I called Daniel's office, asking his assistant to put me through. When he answered, his voice was distracted. "Hey, Liv. Can I call you back? I'm heading into a meeting." "No, this can't wait. I need you to come home."
Now.
"What's wrong? Are you okay?" Now he sounded concerned. "I'm fine, but our marriage isn't. There are things we need to discuss immediately." My voice was calm, but firm. "Liv, you're scaring me. What's going on?" "Just come home, Daniel. And don't tell your parents. This is between us." I hung up, then began organizing my findings. If Daniel was complicit in this scheme, I needed to be prepared to walk away. If he was being manipulated as I suspected, we needed to present a united front. Either way, the charade ended today. When Daniel arrived 40 minutes later, he looked genuinely worried. "What's happening? Mom said you were sick, but you sounded angry on the phone." I locked our bedroom door behind him. "Sit down, Daniel. We need to talk about your parents, Becky, and why our bank accounts are being drained." His face went pale, not with guilt, I noted, but with confusion. "What are you talking about?" I laid out the evidence methodically, the family holding account, the changed passwords, the credit card charges, and finally, the merger agreement. I don't understand, he whispered, staring at the documents. This makes no sense. I ended things with Becky years ago. And these bank transfers, I never authorized these. Your signature is on them, I pointed out. He examined the forms more closely. This isn't my signature. It's close, but... He looked up, realization dawning. My father. He's forged my signature before for convenience, but never for something like this. I studied his face, looking for any sign of deception. Daniel, I need to know, are you part of this? Was marrying me some kind of diversionary tactic while you figured out how to handle the Harrington merger? God, no. He took my hands, his eyes fierce with an intensity one hadn't seen in weeks. Liv, I married you because I love you. Only you. I had no idea any of this was happening. I wanted to believe him, but there was still one question he hadn't answered. Then why did you and Becky really break up? What was so important that you'd walk away from a multi-million-dollar merger? Daniel's shoulders slumped. Because it wasn't real. None of it was. Becky and I, we were arranged, Liv. Our engagement wasn't love. It was a business transaction that had been planned since we were children. This finally rang true. And you couldn't go through with it. He nodded. I tried. For years, I played along. But when it came time to actually propose, he shook his head. I couldn't do it. I left Charleston, came to Atlanta, met you, and for the first time, I understood what it meant to actually choose someone. I felt the tension in my shoulders ease slightly. So what now? Your parents are clearly trying to sabotage us and funnel your money back into their control. The jewelry receipt. Daniel, they're buying Becky an engagement ring with our money. His expression hardened. Then we stopped them. Today. He stood, his spine straightening with a resolve I hadn't seen since our wedding day. It's time I made a choice, Liv. A real one. He took my hand, his grip firm and certain. I choose you. Not my parents' expectations. Not their business deals. You. It was the first time in weeks that I truly believed him. Daniel's newfound resolve energized us both. We spent the afternoon developing a plan, first to secure our finances, then to confront his parents with what we'd discovered. I suggested we meet with them separately, concerned that together, Margaret and Gerald formed too formidable an opposition. Your mother manipulates with emotion, your father with business, I explained. We need to divide and conquer. Daniel agreed, calling his father to request a meeting at a nearby coffee shop. Just us men, he'd said casually. I need some advice on an investment opportunity. While Daniel dealt with Gerald, I had time to dig deeper. Something about the merger agreement still bothered me. The language suggested a long-standing arrangement between families, not just a recent business deal. I returned to the guest room, carefully searching through Gerald's briefcase again. Behind a false pocket in the leather lining, I found a USB drive labeled Family Archives. Plugging it into my laptop revealed decades of correspondence between the Porters and the Harringtons. Emails, scanned letters, even photographs dating back to when Daniel and Becky were children, dressed in matching outfits at country club events, posed together at family vacations, standing awkwardly at proms. But the most disturbing documents were the oldest, a formal agreement dated nearly 30 years ago between Gerald Porter and Maxwell Harrington, outlining the eventual merger of their business interests through the marriage of their children. Daniel had been promised to Becky when he was just 5 years old. Further emails revealed the panic when Daniel had broken the engagement. Threats of lawsuits from the Harringtons, desperate negotiations from Gerald, and finally, a tentative agreement to a cooling-off period during which Daniel would get this independent streak out of his system. My marriage, my entire relationship, had been classified as a phase, a temporary rebellion to be managed and eventually corrected. The most recent emails confirmed my worst fears. The Porters' visit wasn't tradition. It was an extraction mission. They were here to separate Daniel from me emotionally and financially, creating enough distance to reintroduce Becky and remind him of his real responsibilities. A message from Gerald to Maxwell Harrington, dated just 2 weeks ago, laid it out explicitly. The situation is progressing as planned. Margaret has established dominance in the household, and we've begun redirecting Daniel's finances back into family control. The wife suspects nothing. Becky's initial reintroduction went smoothly. Daniel was clearly affected by seeing her again. We anticipate a full dissolution of this unfortunate marriage within 3 months, after which the original agreement can proceed. I photographed everything, hands shaking with a mixture of rage and vindication. This wasn't paranoia. It was a calculated, multi-generational conspiracy. When Daniel returned from his meeting with Gerald, his face was ashen. "You were right," he said, collapsing onto our bed. Dad admitted everything. He thought I'd figured out, said it was time I grew up and accepted my responsibilities to the family. And Becky? Was she part of this too? Daniel nodded grimly. Apparently, she agreed to wait while they handled you. Dad said she's been patient, but her family's getting restless. The Harrington portfolio took a hit last quarter. They need the merger more than ever. I showed him what I'd found on the USB drive. As he read through the decades of manipulation, Daniel's expression changed from shock to disgust to a cold, determined anger I'd never seen before. "They planned our entire lives," he whispered. "They've been steering me like a ship since before I could walk." "What do you want to do?" I asked. He looked at me, eyes clear and resolute. "I want to burn it all down." We spent the next hour making calls, first to our bank, where Daniel reported the fraudulent transfers and ordered all accounts frozen. Next to a locksmith, who promised to arrive within the hour to change our home's locks. Then to a financial advisor Daniel trusted, who agreed to meet us the following morning to discuss completely separating our assets from the Porter family holdings. "What about your mother?" I asked as we worked. "Will you confront her too?" Daniel's jaw tightened.
Together.
"She needs to see us united." Margaret returned late that afternoon, arms laden with grocery bags filled with ingredients for yet another traditional Porter family recipe. Her smile faltered when she saw us waiting in the living room, side by side on the couch. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her southern charm firmly in place despite the tension radiating from us. "Daniel, shouldn't you be at work, darling?" "Sit down, Mom," Daniel said quietly. "We need to talk." To her credit, Margaret didn't feign ignorance for long. As Daniel laid out what we'd discovered, the financial manipulation, the coordination with Becky, the decades-long arrangement, her denial quickly gave way to righteous indignation. "You have responsibilities, Daniel," she hissed, her genteel mask slipping. "To your family, to your legacy. This," she gestured dismissively at me, "was supposed to be a phase, a rebellion, not a life choice." "That wasn't your decision to make," Daniel replied, his voice steady. "Of course it was. We're your parents. We know what's best for you, what's best for the Porter name. And what about what's best for me? Did that ever factor into your calculations?" Margaret's laugh was brittle. "Darling, don't be naive. Marriage isn't about happiness. It's about suitable matches, about building something greater than yourself. Becky understands that. She comes from our world." "But I don't love her," Daniel said simply. "Love." Margaret spat the word like it tasted bad. "What has love got to do with building a dynasty? Your father and I had an arranged match, and we've built a perfectly satisfactory life." Satisfactory. Daniel echoed the word. "Is that really what you want for me, Mom? A satisfactory life?" For a moment, something vulnerable flickered across Margaret's face, something almost like regret. But it vanished quickly, replaced by steel. "What I want," she said coldly, "is for you to honor your commitments." "My only commitment," Daniel replied, taking my hand, "is to Olivia, my wife, the woman I chose." Margaret stood, smoothing her immaculate slacks. "I see Gerald was right. You're not ready to be reasonable. Perhaps a more forceful approach is needed." "If you mean the lawsuit the Harringtons have been threatening, save your breath," I interjected. "I've already spoken with a lawyer. The agreement you made for Daniel when he was 5 isn't legally binding. He never signed it as an adult." This was a bluff, but I delivered it with such conviction that doubt crossed Margaret's face. "Beyond that," I continued, I think the business press would be fascinated by the story of how two prominent Southern families tried to arrange a marriage in the 21st century. I'm sure your investors would have questions about your decision-making. Margaret's face paled. If there was one thing Charleston society feared more than scandal, it was public scandal. You wouldn't dare. It would destroy the family reputation. No, Mom, Daniel said quietly. You've done that already. Now I'm asking you and Dad to leave our home. Today. This is outrageous. We came here to help you. You came here to manipulate me, steal from me, and undermine my marriage. Those aren't the actions of loving parents. They're the actions of business partners protecting an investment. And I'm no longer interested in being part of that portfolio. Margaret gathered her dignity around her like armor. You'll regret this, Daniel. When this infatuation has run its course, you'll realize what you've thrown away. She stormed out of the living room, presumably to pack. Daniel exhaled slowly, the tension leaving his body in waves. Are you okay? I asked, squeezing his hand. He nodded. For the first time in years, I think I actually am. The locksmith arrived 30 minutes later, just as Gerald returned home to find his wife packing in a fury. There was shouting, threats of disinheritance, vague warnings about consequences. But by nightfall, the porters were gone, the locks were changed, and Daniel and I were alone in our home for the first time in nearly 2 months. As we surveyed the aftermath, space is now emptied of the porters' possessions, but still bearing the marks of their occupation. Daniel pulled me close. Thank you, he whispered against my hair. For what? For fighting for us. For seeing what I couldn't or wouldn't see. I held him tightly, relishing his familiar scent without Margaret's perfume overlaying it. We have a lot to rebuild, I said. He nodded against my shoulder. I know, but we'll do it together. No hidden agendas, no family expectations. Just us. For the first time since our wedding day, I truly believed him. Margaret and Gerald's departure left a strange emptiness in our home, like the hollow quiet after a hurricane passes. We spent the first evening reclaiming our space, restoring furniture to its original positions, removing Margaret's labels from kitchen containers, and putting my grandmother's knitted throw blanket back on the couch where it belonged. I can't believe how much they changed in just 2 months, Daniel said, helping me reorganize our bedroom closet. It's like they were slowly erasing us and replacing us with versions of ourselves they preferred. That was exactly the plan, I replied, showing him a box of my clothes I discovered in the garage, items Margaret had deemed not suitable and quietly removed from circulation. Your mother was redecorating our life, room by room. The next morning brought the first countermove. Gerald called Daniel at work, his voice carefully modulated between anger and paternal concern. Your mother is devastated, he reported when Daniel relayed the conversation that evening. Apparently, I've broken her heart and destroyed the family legacy in one fell swoop. And the Harringtons? Any word from that front? Daniel's laugh was humorless. Oh yes. Maxwell Harrington himself called to remind me that my reckless behavior could have significant repercussions for both families.
He shook his head.
It's surreal. Hearing these people I've known my entire life suddenly speaking like villains in a bad movie. We spent the weekend securing our finances. The bank froze the fraudulent transfers, but recovering the money already moved would take time and legal effort. Daniel's financial advisor helped us establish entirely new accounts with enhanced security features and removed Gerald's name from all of Daniel's investment holdings. I should have done this years ago, Daniel admitted as we left the advisor's office. I just never imagined my own parents would. He couldn't finish the sentence. I squeezed his hand. They thought they were doing what was best for you. No, he said firmly. They were doing what was best for them, for their businesses and social standing. I was just a chess piece. 2 weeks after the confrontation, we received an embossed cream envelope in the mail, an invitation to the annual Porter Family Foundation Gala. Daniel almost threw it away, but I stopped him. We should go, I suggested. He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. You can't be serious. I am. They're expecting us to hide, to slink away in shame. Let's do the opposite. Let's show them, and everyone in your circle, that we're not going anywhere." Daniel considered this, a slow smile spreading across his face. That would certainly send a message. "Besides," I added, "I'd really like to meet this Becky properly, woman to woman." The night of the gala arrived, and I dressed with deliberate care. Not in the conservative, classic style Margaret would have approved, but in a bold red dress that Margaret had once described as trying too hard. My grandmother's simple pearl necklace, not inherited from generations of Southern aristocracy, but purchased from a department store with her teacher's salary, completed the look. Daniel looked at me with unmistakable pride as we entered the ballroom. Conversation stuttered to a halt as we made our entrance, whispers rippling through the crowd like wind through tall grass. Margaret spotted us first, her champagne glass freezing halfway to her lips. Gerald, deep in conversation with an elderly gentleman, followed her gaze and visibly paled. And there, holding court near the orchestra, was Becky, resplendent in a pale blue gown, pearls at her throat and wrists. Her smile faltered when she saw us, genuine surprise flickering across her perfect features. "Ready?" Daniel whispered. I nodded, and we moved through the crowd toward his parents. Margaret recovered quickly, her social training kicking in as we approached. "Daniel, Olivia," she greeted us, voice honey-sweet for the benefit of those nearby. "What an unexpected pleasure." "We wouldn't miss it," I replied with equal sweetness. "Family tradition is so important, isn't it?" Gerald attempted a gruff welcome, but his discomfort was palpable. Before the small talk could progress, I spotted Becky approaching, curiosity evident in her expression. "Daniel," she said warmly, air kissing his cheek. "I didn't expect to see you tonight." Her gaze shifted to me, assessing. "And Olivia, lovely to see you again." "Becky," I smiled, meeting her eyes directly. "I believe we have a lot in common. We should chat." A flash of alarm crossed Margaret's face. "Rebecca, darling, I believe your father was looking for you." But Becky, to her credit, stood her ground. "Actually, I'd love to talk with Olivia. Shall we find somewhere quieter?" We left Daniel with his parents and found a relatively secluded corner by the terrace doors. Up close, Becky was even more flawless, but there was something in her eyes I hadn't anticipated: weariness. "So," she said without preamble, "you found out about the arrangement?"
"Yes."
"Did you know they were trying to break us up?" She sighed, twisting a pearl bracelet around her wrist. "Not at first. They told me Daniel was unhappy, having doubts, that he'd realized his mistake." She met my gaze directly. I should have known better. Daniel was never that good at hiding his feelings, and he never looked at me the way he looks at you. The simple honesty caught me off guard. Then why go along with it? "Family pressure," she said with a humorless laugh. "You have no idea what it's like, being the Harrington heiress. My whole life has been planned, every choice pre-approved." She glanced around the room, lowering her voice. "Between us, I'm seeing someone, a professor at the university, definitely not Porter Harrington approved." I couldn't help but smile. "Good for you." She returned the smile, a genuine one this time. "Thank you for standing up to them. Maybe it'll give the rest of us courage." When we returned to the main ballroom, Daniel was deep in conversation with his father, his posture rigid but controlled. He relaxed visibly when I rejoined him, taking my hand firmly in his. "I think it's time we made our departure," he said, nodding politely to Gerald. "We have an early appointment tomorrow." The appointment was fictitious, but the message was clear. Our time was now our own, not subject to Porter family approval. In the weeks that followed, we began rebuilding, not just our finances, but our relationship. We started therapy, working through the damage done by the invasion. We established firm boundaries with Daniel's family, agreeing to occasional holiday visits, but nothing more without explicit invitation. But I wasn't quite finished. Using my background in communications, I wrote an anonymous piece for a major women's magazine, The In-Law Invasion, When Marriage Comes with Strings. Without naming names, I detailed our experience, the subtle manipulations, the financial interference, the pressure to conform to family expectations. The article went viral. Thousands of comments poured in from readers sharing similar experiences, offering support, and thanking me for putting words to their struggles. Talk shows discussed it, relationship experts analyzed it, and eventually, a publisher reached out about expanding it into a book. 6 months after our confrontation with the Porters, I received a brief note in the mail, written on expensive cream stationery with a Charleston return address. I read your article.
You write well.
Perhaps we underestimated you. MP. It wasn't an apology, but from Margaret Porter, it was as close as I'd ever get to acknowledgement. Daniel laughed when I showed him the note. That's practically a surrender from my mother. Not surrender. I corrected, pinning the note to our refrigerator with a magnet shaped like the state of Georgia, a souvenir from our first weekend trip together. Just recognition. She finally sees me. And that was all I had ever wanted, to be seen, to be respected, to be acknowledged as Daniel's equal partner, not an inconvenient obstacle in a decades-old business plan. That evening, as we sat on our back porch watching the sunset, Daniel raised his glass of sweet tea, made to my recipe, not his mother's. To us, he said, no hidden agendas, no family schemes. Just two people who chose each other. I clinked my glass against his. And to boundaries, I added with a smile. May ours always remain strong, and our locks always remain changed. As twilight settled around us, I felt a deep sense of peace. The Porters had tried to erase me from my own life, but instead, they had forced me to define myself more clearly than ever before. In fighting for my marriage, I had discovered my own strength. And somewhere in Charleston, I hoped Margaret understood the most important lesson of all. You don't mess with a woman in her own house.